Good morning, everyone. I am going to call to order the Joint Subcommittee on Human Services. Welcome to everyone in attendance here in person and those that are online. At this time, Committee Secretary, can you please call the roll?
Assemblymember Brown-May. Assemblymember Dickman. Assemblymember Hafen. Assemblymember Hibbets. Assemblymember Howdegi. Assemblymember Monroe-Moreno. Assemblymember Yeager. Senator Canizaro. Senator Dondero Loop. Senator Stone. Senator Titus. Assemblymember Mosca. Chair Wen.
Here. And if we can mark those present as they arrive, it is that time of the session where people I know are out and about presenting bills. So if we can mark them present when they arrive into the committee room. Today we have a pretty big agenda and we just some housekeeping matters. If I can ask people to silence their cell phones or other electronic devices. Please state your name clearly for the record when you begin speaking. And every time you answer a question or are called up there to do it, if you could just remember to state your name. I will try to be good about reminding you, but any help in that assistance would be greatly appreciated. Today we are going to start with our budgets from the Division of Child and Family Services, otherwise known as DCFS. And if we can get people into their positions.
There's an overflow room 1214.
Okay. Also, there is an overflow room in 1214. It sounds like we really do have a full house. So hopefully everyone can see us, and I see people in Las Vegas as well. So that is wonderful. There are 7 DCFS budgets on the agenda today. This is the second DCFS budget hearing this session, the first one being held on February 12th. I see we have Administrator Marla McDade-Williams here with us, and I believe she will be presenting. And if we can start with budget accounts 3141, 3142, and 3229, if we can all hear those all together. And then when you've completed kind of those budgets, we'll have some questions for you all, if that works.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Marla McDade-Williams. I serve as the administrator for the Division of Child and Family Services in Nevada's Department of Health and Human Services. With me this morning, I have Kelsey McCann-Navarro, who is our Administrative Services Officer 4, as well as Kyra Morgan, who is our Medical Epidemiologist. I would like to start with our first budget, which is Extended Youth Adult Support Services Program, which we call Extended Foster Care, and just provide you at least a brief overview, and then we will have Ms. Morgan kind of identify some of the justification for funding from the Fund for Resilient Nevada, and then we will have Ms. McCann-Navarro go through the budget items. So as you know, in 2008, Congress passed the Foster Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act. In 2023, as a result of the fact that when the budget was prepared by DCFS, it did not include all categories that are required to be funded by extended foster care. So Senate Bill 380 was passed to revise the date on which an agency that provides child welfare services is required to participate in the program. So the date was changed from January 1st, 2024 to the earlier of July 1st, 2025, or the date on which the Division of Child and Family Services notifies the governor and the director of LCB of the Legislative Council Bureau that there is sufficient money to carry out the provisions of the program. We, the division, as well as Clark and Washoe counties, have been working pretty much since last session and all during the interim to develop the framework for the program. As you may know, the division was required to submit regular reports every 6 months to the Legislative Council Bureau, and our last report was December 2024. So that report was submitted to the legislature, Nevada Extended Young Adult Support Services. Essentially, we have gone through, identified the status of the implementation of the program, the progress of our efforts, recommendations concerning additional programs, any other recommendations to allow young adults to remain in foster care, and the progress of our efforts to secure federal funding for the program. The federal program, as you know, was enacted in response to foster care ending for a child at age 18, when youth often lose access to familiar services and supports, funding, educational opportunities, and connection. And these same youth face significant barriers on the road to adulthood compared to their peers. They run a greater risk of experiencing housing instability and homelessness, a shorter or unfulfilled academic trajectory, unemployment and unstable employment, physical, mental, and behavioral health issues, loss of healthcare access, and involvement in the criminal justice system. So we have gone through, we have done everything that we have needed to do to actually be ready for full implementation July 1st, and that includes developing policies and procedures, regulations, and we have a budget bill draft request that will be coming forward as well. The report lists all of the policies, fact sheets, eligibility forms, and consents that we had prepared, and we do have an approved state plan amendment from our federal funder for this program. So right now, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Morgan to identify issues related to substance use abuse in this population. As you know, Nevada Revised Statutes 433.738, which governs the Fund for Resilient Nevada, has two sections that address the appropriate use of this funding for children.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kyra Morgan, and I serve as the medical epidemiologist for the Division of Child and Family Services. As Marla stated, I just want to provide you with some of the information that we took into account when considering to request opioid funding for dollars to support child welfare programs. Generally speaking, it's very well established in the research that their substance abuse is a significant risk factor when it comes to child maltreatment. And there's a robust suite of studies that justify this, but I brought one with me today that I could share with the committee. It was published in 2021. It's titled Types of Child Maltreatment and Child Welfare Involvement Among Opioid-Using Mothers Involved in Substance Abuse Treatment. This study cites that 50 to 80% of abused and neglected children involved in the child welfare system have a parent with a significant substance use problem. It also states that among the reasons for child removal following a child welfare involvement, parental drug use has demonstrated the largest increase in the most recent years. And it approximates that 1 in 5 child fatalities have been associated with parental substance use. This is a national study, but it's no different here in Nevada. In rural Nevada, 80% of children removed have substance misuse as a removal factor, and 3 out of 4 children who are determined to be unsafe on our Nevada initial assessment are indicated by the impending danger threat that we use as a proxy to parental substance misuse. In 2023, 63% of Nevada children entering foster care had a parental substance use-related removal reason. And when we look at that data over time, our average year-over-year increase is 22% every single year of increase since 2019. And that's related to the percentage of children who are entering foster care with a removal reason related to parental substance misuse. It's also well established that children who enter child welfare, whose parents and caregivers have a history of substance use and abuse, stay in the system longer and are less likely to be reunified, because it's just so hard for these parents to overcome the unsafe behaviors that are associated with a substance abuse issue. It's also really important to emphasize that the impact isn't linear. So I've talked about how substance use contributes to child abuse and neglect, but we also know that children who go through adverse childhood experiences, who are victims of maltreatment today, who are at a much higher risk of developing a substance use disorder later in life. And because of this, interventions to address childhood trauma and promote stability into adulthood are recommended to prevent substance use and other health-related risks among youth and adults across their lifespan. In this context, the use of these funds for intervention through child welfare becomes primary prevention for future generations. So it's my interpretation, based on the opioid settlement target areas of 1, 2, 3, that this clearly aligns. That's building capacity, preventing the misuse of opioids, and reducing harm related to opioid use, as well as the provisions outlined in NRS 433.738 that Marla had mentioned, which talks about the what is allowable for the allocation of statewide programs, and that's included but not limited to early intervention for persons at risk of a substance use disorder, prevention of adverse childhood experiences, and early intervention for children who have undergone adverse childhood experiences and the families of such children, services to reduce harm caused by substance use, and services for children and other persons in a behavioral health crisis and families of those persons. So that's all I brought with me today, and I think I'm handing it back to Kelsey.
Thank you, Kyra. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kelsey McCann-Navarro, and I serve as the Administrative Services Officer for the division. The following slides provide an overview of DCFS's governor's recommended budget. So slide 9 is budget account 3141. This is Washoe County Child Welfare. This budget account provides funding for the Washoe County Human Services Agency to operate child welfare programs. The current block grant funding formula has been in place since it was passed by the 76th legislative session in 2011. The following slide outlines the decision units within the governor's recommended budget. Decision Unit E-251, this request funds the Extended Young Adult Support Services Program that was previously discussed. This request includes caseload and staffing of 4 positions and startup costs in fiscal year 26, and 5 positions in fiscal year 27. This request is contingent upon passage and approval of the enabling legislation. Decision Unit E-267, this request funds additional transportation options for youth in foster care. Additional transportation options are needed to assist in transport to the youth school of origin on occasions when a bus is not feasible due to time and distance. Moving on to budget account 3142, which is Clark County's child welfare. This budget account provides funding for the Clark County Department of Family Services to operate child welfare programs. The current block grant funding formula has been in place since it was passed by the 76th legislative session in 2011. Budget account 251, this request funds the Extended Young Adult Support Services Program that was previously discussed. And this request includes caseload and staffing of 14 positions in state fiscal year 26 and 16 positions in state fiscal year 27. This request is also contingent upon passage and approval of the enabling legislation. Moving on to budget account 3229, this is our rural region child welfare. The DCFS's rural child welfare supports child protective services and other related child welfare services to the 15 rural counties in the state through the rural regional offices. The rural region is separated into 4 districts, each providing services to multiple counties. Child welfare services include emergency response and the continuum of ongoing services to families through a comprehensive case planning process that provides initial assessment and comprehensive case management services that support the child, the parents, and the caregivers. Decision Unit E-251 requests the Extended Young Adult Support Services Program that was previously discussed. Decision Unit 252 requests adds 7 transportation technicians, 5 caseworker management specialists, and associated costs for the implementation of Family First Prevention and Treatment Act and collaborative pathways. Decision Unit 253 requests the relocation of the Child Welfare Fernley office to another location in Fernley.
Madam Chair, that takes us through the slides related to extended foster care, and we are available for questions.
Sorry, some technical difficulties. And mostly I think I want Mr. Thorley to have to go back and forth during this hearing. That makes it fun for me. I know that. Thank you so much for that presentation. As I had said it earlier, I appreciate you kind of going through those 3 budgets. I know some of the questions that we have are similar across those 3 budgets. So, before I go to some of the member questions, I see some of the members of the county, different counties that are present here as well. Can you help me understand how you worked with both, especially Washoe and Clark counties in creating these budgets, since there's so much, I guess, synergy between how these programs are implemented by the counties on these local levels. So if you can kind of talk about that before we see some of the differing needs between Clark and Washoe.
Thank you. For the record, Marla McDade Williams. So as you know, I've been with the division as the administrator, 14, 15 months, something like that. And when I came in, my perspective was that we would not gatekeep any of the proposals that came forward from Clark and Washoe County for their child welfare system. But as you know, in state budgeting, there still is a base budget, and we are still a state agency that is subject to the rules of ensuring that our budget fits within the base. When it came to budgeting for extended foster care, although we are aware that it's a mandate, it's a state mandate, we couldn't fund it fully within the base budget. So what you have is kind of piecemeal. I mean, I believe it identifies the cost, whether that's an agency request or moved forward to GovRec. It identified the costs that the counties put forward, but due to budgeting rules, we were not able to actually move all of that forward to ensure that it was in the base budget. Now, if we had gotten guidance that this is a mandate and funded all fully, then we would have done that. But I don't believe we ever got that clear of guidance on it. And I know that the counties kind of pushed us a little bit to say, this, you need to fund this fully. And again, we're not gatekeeping any of it. We're not saying that any of the county proposals are not valid, because that is not my role. I believe that the counties are fully capable of identifying their needs and justifying the needs for what they put forward.
So, I mean, you had started off saying that the extended foster care was, in fact, a mandate. It's in statute. It was passed, initially in 21. Senator Orenshaw brought that bill. It passed. Obviously, we weren't ready to implement it, and so Senate Bill 380 during the last legislative session was passed with just extending that implementation date to July of this year. So I think it's very clear that it is mandated in statute that we fund that program. So just a little pushback on that. But I know that in looking and talking with Washoe and Clark County, that the budgeted items for like the M200 and M201 agency request budgets, they were submitted back in September, obviously, of 2024, related to those block grant dollars related to adoption. And we see those in the recommended budget. But I know that they also put they submitted, it looks like Washoe submitted 8 budget items related to their child welfare budgets, and Clark County submitted 10 other budget items. And it looks like those the items that you're talking about, how I know they weren't included in the agency request and they're not included in the governor's recommended budget. Where did those items go? Did you find other homes for those? Are those part of the cuts that you said that just couldn't be included? Because those are pretty significant cuts for both of those counties to implement extended foster care benefits.
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, not disputing that it's a mandate. I don't control what goes in the base budget, because if I did, it would be different. But we don't control that, and so there were no expenditures to identify for extended foster care that could have gotten under the base budget, right? So again, there was no intent to cut. That is not what you have before you. We are not saying that Clark and Washoe don't deserve what they put forward in their budget. We're simply saying that the budgeting rules didn't allow us to move it forward on their behalf. I mean, that's a fact. The budget rules don't allow us to move those forward. They are, again, legitimate proposals from each of those jurisdictions, and I am not judging whether or not they are worthy or not worthy. We did not do that in our budget process. I think that is the value of being able to see items for special consideration and agency request and governor's recommendations, because then you can go back and say, all right, help me understand all of these needs, and if we choose to fund it. And I can tell you in extended foster care, we went through a number of, just internally, scenarios to figure out what we could move forward and how to move it forward. So one of those decision points is, do we only, which, again, they were thoughts, but they weren't decision points, but do we limit it to only 18, right, in the budget that we proposed? Well, we don't have that authority. The statute says you're funding 18 to 21. Okay, so if we have to fund 18 to 21 and this is the potential cost for that, what's the uptake of that? Is it 100%? Is it 50%? Is it 10%? So we're going through all of those things, trying to figure out where we want to land things, but realizing that in the end, we will all come together and figure out what is the best way to fund this program. And what do we want to fund, if we want to fund it at all, right? I mean, it is still the legislature's prerogative to determine whether to fund it or not fund it, based on the overall cost. And again, not keeping any of the counties' items. And I know it looks that way. I know that you've got one item where one county got one thing and the other county did the same thing. And it's like, well, you treated them more special than the others. But really, it's just budgeting, and it has nothing to do with the value of any of those proposals.
I just want to be clear. At some point, you had to make a decision on where that money was prioritized. I have concerns not only with how the decisions, the policy decisions, and what your agency chose to recommend to support those extended foster care programs and other programs too, related to both Washoe and Clark. But I think that also brings me into whether or not the rural child welfare budget is going to be appropriate, because come July 1st, this is the first time our rural community foster care kids will be eligible for those extended foster care benefits that are kind of already provided by the counties in Clark and Washoe. So do you have enough, and that obviously falls more on the state to deliver those services. Do you have any concerns that you did not fund that budget appropriately to be able to provide those services to those rural children that are about to receive extended foster care benefits?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, I honestly haven't looked at it that closely to be able to answer that, because the reality is that we have to fund all counties the same way. We can't fund one over the other. And so in the end, if there's a decision made that we're only going to allocate a certain amount of money to do this, and for at least for the Division of Child and Family Services, we can go to the IFC contingency fund if we are above that. I think one of the policy decisions that is before you is extended foster care considered part of the block grant funding for the counties, which I think, as a mandate, a new mandate, I'm not sure that would be, the decision that comes forward, because this is a new mandate. And yes, it was in place. And the reason it didn't move forward in 2023 was because at that time, we believed that we could just fund foster care, but we realized that we could not, that we had to fund adoption and kinship foster. And so that put a wrench in it, and that's what resulted in the extension. But one of the policy decisions is, does this come under the block grant funding for the counties, or does it not? And if it does not, then how much money do we allocate for that? And is it something that when you allocate that money and it does become part of the block grant base, then those counties have to work within those parameters to fund the programs? I mean, that is the bifurcated child welfare system that we have.
I'm sorry, Administrator Williams. I'm talking about our responsibility with our rural counties. They don't receive those block grants. They are not going to be administering these things. I want to make sure that our foster youth and our aged out extended foster kids that are in our rural communities are going to be provided for, because that is actually our responsibility.
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, as I understand it, the agency request budget that we put forward is relatively consistent with the governor's recommended budget.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm having some microphone issues. I think I'm going to move on at this point. I have one more question. Sorry, committee. I appreciate your patience. You had talked about this. I see some of these things and they don't make any sense, and you had recommended them, and I just don't understand the thinking that went into this. For example, Washoe got funding for transportation and then partial funding for extended young adults. And then Clark didn't get any funding for transportation, but got partial funding for extended foster care. So what was the thinking behind that?
Again, Madam Chair, for the record, Marla McDade Williams, it really was just the budget rules. There was no judgment about one being more valuable than the other.
I think I will move on and we will perhaps talk offline, but if we can go next to Assemblymember Brown May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I will admit that this morning I've had plenty of coffee, but I am confused about the budget rules. And I would love to know more about how we're allocating and making those determinations. But I'm going to go to a specific question at this point and maybe get us moving a little. There is an item in the budget that funds non-recurring legal fees, okay, for adoption subsidies. And it looks as though the rate is off, and I'm just curious if you can clarify that. It looks like the intent was to include a rate increase from $500 to $1,000, but the math doesn't math, so I'm just curious, can you talk about that? Is that truly the intent to raise the rate from $500 to $1,000? That's question one.
Thank you for the question, Councilman Canavar, for the record. Are you referencing Washoe County?
Yes, thank you.
Just to clarify,
I
okay.
am, yes.
Councilman
thank you.
Canavar, for the record, the base rate of the 500 for non-reoccurring legal caseload, according to Washoe County's response, was a rate increase was necessary to support increased legal costs for the Indian Child Welfare Act, due to the regulatory changes in all other adoption cases, due to the inability to recruit adoption attorneys at the previously established rate. So they were requesting a increase so they could retain more attorneys to provide those adoption services.
Thank you, I appreciate that. It just looks like the dollar amounts are not in sync with then what the rate increase request would be. So I'm curious to know if the caseload then is projected at 88 cases at $1,000, do we need to increase the amounts that are in the budget? Right now, it looks like $76,500 is included, but wouldn't the agency need the $88,000 then in order to do that?
Councilman Canavar, for the record, thank you for the question. We can work with our LCB analysts to see if a amendment or a technical adjustment is needed. We can get back to you on that.
Thank you. And then just to further clarify that, that's the expected caseload, right? So then the non-recurring legal fees can be in sync with what the projected caseloads are for Washoe.
Councilman Navarro, for the record, yes, that is correct. We will have updated caseload numbers in mid-April. So we'll have based on actuals through the Office of Data Analytics.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
We can go next to Speaker Yeager. We could take a brief recess. Thank you, everyone. We'll come back to order, and now I'll go back to Speaker Yeager.
Thank you so much, Chair. My brain is working on Monday time instead of Wednesday time today, so I just wanted to make sure I had a good sense of where we were. So the questions I have really, they're on the implementation of the Extended Youth Adult Services Support Services Program. And the question really pertains to all three, Clark, Washoe, and the Rural Child Welfare. And they have to do with the opioid settlement funds. I know you talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to ask the question because we've had a lot of items in this committee that are being proposed to be funded by the opioid settlement funds. And I think as we've stated, we want to make sure those are being used appropriately and as envisioned by NRS. So if you could talk how it was determined that the funds would be an allowable and appropriate use for the Extended Youth Adult Support Services Program. And again, that is really for all three of the budget accounts we went through.
Thank you. For the record, Marla McDade Williams. So NRS 433.738 specifically allows for funding for prevention of adverse childhood experiences and early intervention for children who have undergone adverse childhood experiences and the families of such children. In addition, it allows for services for children and other persons in a behavioral health crisis and the families of such persons. And so we believe that the statutory language is appropriate for, as Ms. Morgan laid out, the experiences that children in the child welfare system experience.
And Chair, if I could ask a follow-up. I'm looking at the statute as well, and obviously there are a number of things that are listed there, but I kind of feel like it probably goes without saying that there needs to be some kind of a nexus to opioids or substance use disorders. I mean, just the nature of the settlement funds relating to opioids, I think dictate that. And so has there been any analysis done? I mean, are the youth being served in these, that are intended to be served in these programs, are they in these programs because of opioid use, either by parents? Because I just get worried that, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great program, but where is the nexus for actual opioids beyond, just a program that's going to help folks? And so if you could talk about that, maybe that's a historical thing you can talk about in terms of, I'll just stop asking the question and let you answer. Thank you.
Kyra Morgan, for the record. Yeah, we did. We pulled a lot of in-house data, and we also looked at national literature, and all of the data demonstrate, again, 80% of rural Nevada children that were removed from their families had substance misuse as a removal factor, which means that their parental substance use was directly related to the reason that those kids were taken into foster care. We also looked at the Nevada data as well as national literature to demonstrate that we've observed a 22% increase every single year since 2019 in that as a removal factor, which means that this year we had 22% more of our foster care youth being removed with a risk factor of parental substance use than we had last year. Last year we had 22% higher than we had the year before that. So we're seeing a really exponential growth in the relationship between parental substance use and entrance into child welfare. And then to just add to what the administrator mentioned, these kids are, 80% of them who are entering the foster care system were victims of maltreatment that is related to parental substance use. But then the literature also demonstrates that because of those adverse childhood experiences, they're much more likely to become substance users themselves. And so, our perspective, from an epidemiologist perspective, that becomes primary prevention, because those youth who are really at the age of extended foster care, 18 to 20, that is an early intervention age for their own addictive behaviors or risk factors that are associated with that age group, which are compounded by their childhood adverse experiences. So I believe it's very clear that there's a huge nexus between the opioid epidemic and this particular population.
Chair, and then if I could just ask a couple of quick clarifying questions. So I
ahead.
think thank you. The 80% you mentioned, I think you mentioned rural, but do those statistics go to Clark and Washoe as well? Because we're obviously talking about three budget accounts that look the same in terms of the way that they're structured. So can you talk about, is that what we're seeing statewide? Do we have different data in Clark and Washoe?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Kyra Morgan for the record. Statewide in 2023, 63% of Nevada's children entering foster care had a parental substance use related removal reason.
Thank you. And then one final question, if I could, Chair. You may not know this. I don't know if we keep this kind of granular data, but when we talk about substance use disorders or issues, is that broken down in any fashion in terms of what the substance was? I mean, understanding that there's polysubstance use as well, but do we know like how many of that were opioids versus some other substance?
Kyra Morgan for the record. Unfortunately, I don't think in our Unity database we have great data collection to break down the particular substances. But I did look into this particular question, kind of expecting it, and the peer-reviewed article that I brought today was able to look at that specifically, and it found that the risk for child maltreatment is similar for children of mothers who use opioids versus other substances. Children of mothers with general substance use were not more or less likely to be removed from their home than opioids specifically. So generally what that is telling us is that this pattern is not substance specific. And then again, to your point, a lot of these parents are polysubstance users as well.
Great. And then if you haven't already and you're able to, would you be able to submit that study to the committee? I would like to take a look at that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for the latitude, Chair.
Thank you. Next, if we can go to Assembly Member Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Chair. And I have a few questions, and we might need the GFO to come up and help answer them. Ms. Williams, you referred a number of times to the budget rules. Could you explain what those budget rules are? Are they statutory, or are they something that came from the executive branch? What are those budget rules?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, I have a very basic understanding that they are budget rules and we have a cap to adhere to, so I would defer to the Governor's Finance Office.
Chair, would it be okay to invite the...
Of course.
Thank
I see her in the room. Thank you, and I appreciate you asking that question. We were using that term kind of loosely, so if we can get some direction on that, that would be wonderful.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Tiffany Greenmeyer for the record. Yes, when budgets are billed, agency request, there is a policy put out by the Governor's Finance Office that agencies are to remain inside their cap. So, and the Governor's Finance Office creates the cap and provides a memo to each that is sent out to each one of the agencies that gives them a guideline of the cap. And so that's why you see the budget account as a whole for every department has to stay within that cap. Does that answer your question?
Can you tell us how that cap is determined? What are the factors that go into making the decision of what that cap is? And then what is, do they have to stay 3% within the cap, 2 times the cap, 3 times the cap? What determines what the cap is?
Tiffany Greenmeyer for the record. So the cap is built on on the year 2, so the work program year, which is the second year of the biennium, and it's 2 times that cap, plus it is increased by the COLA. So the percent of the COLA that is increased in the cap, plus the 2 times of the year 2 of the biennium. So, and plus, and then what is also considered, all one-time money is removed out of that cap.
Okay,
Was that clear?
that is clear, but it doesn't take into account if there's a growing need. It's just going off of what was in the second year of the biennium, that decision was made during the legislative session. But if the need is growing in Clark or in Washoe in the rules, it doesn't take into account that growing need or the actual funding that was needed, just what was in the approved budget in the biennium. Am I understanding that correctly?
Tiffany Greenmeyer for the record. You are correct, because the only thing that is taken in consideration is the personnel, right? So if they're, because, typically a COLA is not put in the budget, so that is considered. But as far as taking a percent of need for each one of the budget account, no, that is not.
Madam Chair. So I just kind of have a stupid question. Then how are we as a state ever going to fully address the needs if we don't take that into consideration? I mean, if we're only looking at like the operating expenses, right, and the COLAs, how are we ever going to really fund the needs of the constituents, of the recipients of these programs, if we don't take those things into account? And I know we don't have all the money in the world, right? But at the end of the day, it's the people that these programs benefit and affect, and that's where the funding needs to be. So if we don't take that into account when we build the budget, build the formula, how are we ever going to do the work that we're really supposed to be doing?
Tiffany Greenmeyer for the record. No, you're absolutely right. So it's up to each one of the departments to determine, within that cap as to what the most important need is. And the cap is not considered on any other funding other than general fund. But it is difficult, and I will let you know that. I mean, it's not easy to try to bring everybody within that cap to budget fully within that cap. But then we're stuck with the economic forum dollars too. And the economic forum in December only grew by 3.5%. So that's all taken in consideration too when it gets into GovRec.
Well, thank you. I didn't understand the budget rule that Ms. Williams was referring to. Thank you. There may have been other people that didn't understand it. So thank you for explaining it. It's not the answer I was hoping to hear or wanted to hear, or I think we need to hear as a state, but at least we have an answer. So I appreciate that. Chair, I have some other questions going back to the extended young adult support services, the E251, and specifically for Washoe, but it's probably going to be the same for all. Could you let us know why, and you probably said this, and during your presentation, I just kind of got stuck on the budget rules, why the governor's recommendation for all foster care youth who are between the ages of 18 and 21 after July 1st of 2025 in the three child welfare agencies' caseloads and funding estimates, considering that from the backup documentation that I've read, most youth leave the foster care before they turn 18, and the average foster care age out rate is about 5.5%. So why are we funding children that may not still be in the foster care system?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. One of the rules for a state's full participation in this is that youth are able to come back into the program at any time if they have been in the foster care system. So someone who may have left at 16 or 17, at 19 or 20 could still come back into the program. So again, it's just the difficulty of doing those estimates.
So in essence, that money is just like held in savings for those children if they do come back. And then if they don't return, what happens with those funds?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. I mean, I think if this gets into the baseline of the block grant for the counties, then, the counties have the opportunity to continue to use that funding out into the future. If any, and for them, again, if it got into the block grant and they ran up against the cap, they would not have the opportunity to come back and ask for increased funding. Where rural child welfare, because we have access to the contingency fund, if we ran out, we could come back and ask for more. If we didn't use it, it would, there's no real implication if we didn't use it.
Thank you for that. And there's one last question. With the services, with the extended young adult program, incentivize more youth in foster care to remain in the system until they age out, potentially increasing the existing age out rate? And if so, does your agency project that the age out rate to be with the implementation of this program?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. I'm not sure I followed the entirety of the question, but one of the things that we have been developing is ways to work with the youth to help them understand the benefits of participating in this program. And I think that's what you see in the staffing that has been put forward for all of the agencies, recognizing that staffing is key to helping these kids be successful as they go into adulthood. So there are benefits, but there are also expectations. And one of those expectations is that caseworkers meet monthly with the youth. And there may be some youth who, that's just too much for me and I don't want to do that. But I think one of the things that people in the system are aware of is that sometimes the caseworker, the child's caseworker, is the only person that they have any adult connection with. And so they often trust them to guide them out into adulthood. That is the hope in all of the work that we've been doing, that these youth realize that they have a benefit there, and that these caseworkers can guide them, through and help them make good decisions as they grow into adulthood. And I think I missed the second part of your question.
Do you project that the age out rate to be with the, how do you predict the age out rate will be impacted with the implementation of this program? Currently, it's at the 5.5%. Do you expect that to lower or increase? What's the expectations?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, I think the expectation is that it increases.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
And I see we have some representatives from Clark County and Washoe County. If you wouldn't mind, I have some questions kind of following up on that, if you wouldn't mind sharing the table here. I have some concerns. Obviously, we see right now, and we have some history in both Washoe and Clark to see whether or not these foster age out rates are at about 5.5%. Is that what you are seeing in Clark and Washoe right now? This just seems like a lot of money to hold, and I don't know if this money actually does get transferred to the counties in these block grants, or whether or not we are funding you at a 5.5% age out rate, because this is moving to 100% like coverage in this area. So if you could shed some light on that. That would be
Madam
great.
Chair, Joanna Jacob for Clark County. At the table in the south is my DFS director, Frank Prado, and director of clinical service, Jill Moreno. She's the one who has been working on the budget in the interim. And then we have some Pam Kowalski also from our fiscal unit. So I don't know if our Clark County representatives down south could state that we've built our estimates on the extended foster care system based on some of the existing data that we have. So perhaps Jill or Pam, perhaps you could try and address that question.
Jill Moreno, for the record, Clark County Director of Clinical and Community Services, but previously with Family Services when we developed our budget ask. And so, just typically to understand the numbers that we're looking at in Clark County, we typically have around 3,000 kids in foster care. And every year we have about 100 or so that age out and go into our voluntary jurisdiction program, or Step Up. Step Up is our program that provides youth supports for children 18 to 21 now. It's looks like the extended youth support program with a few different modifications. So it's really our, as we've been calling it, our extended foster care, air quote, light program. And we have seen, since that program started probably a decade or so ago, we have typically run around 300 children in that program. So if you think about at any given time, there's about 3,000 kids in foster care and about 300 in an extended foster care program. I think that 5 to 10% is really probably a pretty accurate number over the last many years. But we feel confident that in an extended foster care program, we would continue to see around that 295 to 300 children.
Thank you. And if we have an answer for Washoe, I think that would be helpful as well.
Thank you. For the record, Ryan Gustafson, Director, Washoe County Human Services Agency. I think when we had submitted our asks, it was in line with the response that you got from Ms. Moreno, in that we have our court jurisdiction program, or what we have called historically our AB 350 program, which looks sort of like a light version of the proposed extended foster care. We have several dozen. We have about 600 kids in care in Washoe County at any given time, and we have around between 30 and 40. So the percentages are about the same. And when we had built out our asks for the proposed extended foster care, we were looking at 60 kids for FY26, and then approximately 80 kids for FY27. Then again, after the third year, once you reach that 20 to 21, that would then hit a natural new baseline. So I think that those percentages are fairly accurate.
Thank you. And this could be for both of you, and I don't know if we, just to be abundantly clear, I think the administrator mentioned that even if this was funded at 100%, those monies would pass through to the counties in those block grants. Is that happening currently? Like, are you being funded at 100% of those kids that are covered? Even though you're only seeing like a 5 to 10% age out?
Madam Chair, Cadence Matievich, for the record, CADENCEMATIJEVICH, representing Washoe County. I think you're all going to be able to do that along with me by the time we get to the end of May. I'm not sure that we fully understand your question, because the AB 350 program that Mr. Gustafson mentioned, there is not direct program funding for that. In many ways, we pay for that out of our general fund. And so it's not a one-for-one. This is a new program. And Madam Chair, as we've worked through this, in prior biennium, we've identified the fiscal impact. And in fact, there's money existing in fiscal year 25 for startup for this, which gets zeroed out in the next biennium. Kind of a mystery to us, frankly, that something that's in the base for a continuing program would get zeroed out and then come in as an enhancement unit in items for special consideration. So we're confused by that, but we don't fully understand the way we see it built in the budget with this E251 decision unit, which is in both of our budget accounts, though it looks a little bit different as you've noted. Whether that in logistically speaking, those amounts will just get rolled into our block grant and distributed that way. If there's going to be reporting that's necessary, we do think that because 50% of that funding is opioid dollars, that there's probably new eligibility and reporting requirements that will come along with that we didn't anticipate when we looked at our staffing and what it would take to manage these caseloads. I think we can probably adjust for that, but that's unclear to us as well, Senator. So I don't know that I answered your question, but that's our perspective.
No, thank you. And I appreciate you guys coming up to the table. And I think that gives a little bit more direction. I know that we're looking at it and it's so much money to hold back. If, if you're seeking to cover 100% of the kids, I think this is a perfect example of where we've seen it done on the counties. And so we have some background information to know what we potentially need to fund going forward. So thank you. And thank you for being available to answer questions. And I think with that, we will go next to Senator Don Darrowloop.
Thank you very much. And you sort of bounced around some of my questions, but can you clarify or discuss why the governor's recommendation does not include funding to support those youth who have already aged out of foster care, who would become eligible once the extended Young Adult Support Services Program goes into effect on July 1, 2025?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. I think one of the issues that we're facing is just identifying the potential caseload. So it's not really not intending to fund things, but it's getting us to that point where we know what the caseload numbers are.
So I get that, but if it's not in the budget, it won't matter what the caseload is, will it?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. I mean, I think we have to make some decisions based on caseload and what it would cost to cover the caseload, and then make a determination of whether or not, we intend to budget for it.
So following up on that, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, will you then talk a little bit about why the governor's recommendation proposes monthly foster care payment for the extended young adult services program at $971 a month, which exceeds the 2023 legislatively approved foster care rate of $915 per month?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, my understanding is that that is what the rate is for the current court jurisdiction program that the county's just talked about.
I wonder if it would be helpful, Madam Chair, to have the counties address that, and if not, it's okay if we're short on time.
Would you be able to address that? If you need to get back to us, that's fine too. Okay. How about we do that? It looks like they're indicating that they need some additional time to collect that data.
Right. Thank you much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I am going to go next to Chair Mosca.
Thank you, Chair. And so this is a specific Washoe County question because I believe it's not funded at all for Clark County. But can you discuss any alternate funding sources the Washoe County Human Services Agency considered to support the increases in transportation costs?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, is that directed to me or to Washoe County?
I think that's probably directed to you because in your recommended budget, there was money given for transportation costs. So this is obviously one of those block grant items, so we don't see the line item. We don't have access to that line item. So we're just wondering what other funding options that were looked at to determine that Washoe was granted transportation costs, for example, and Clark wasn't given any at all.
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, again, all I can say is that it was due to the caps that we were trying to work under. No judgment on whether or not that was something that should be funded or not funded. I think we always have on the table every budget year the block grant that the counties administer. When it came to extended foster care, I think, we wanted to budget it all as one. If it comes to new initiatives that are potentially outside of the block grant, then that's a policy decision And I would like to say it's a policy decision of the Division of Child and Family Services, but it really isn't, because we have limits on what we can propose in our budget. And, if we had, I would not have moved anything forward, right, if I was gatekeeping the county's proposals.
Thank you. And I appreciate that there are difficult decisions that need to be made. But, just going back to this, I want to make it very clear for people that are watching in the public and also for our committee, because I think there was some confusion about like the term budget rules. Those are not statutorily defined. Those are internal policy decisions that the governor's finance office has given direction to the agencies. That's correct. I see you nodding your head. Yes.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I know it's difficult to remember. We're always recording here. So thank you. And I don't know if we have any other questions related to these budget items. I'm looking around to see if there's anything here. I would just ask you to keep working with us. Still, I think we have more questions than answers regarding some of the decisions that were made and the priorities that were made within those budget caps that you were given by the governor's finance office, because they seem to be so inconsistent across the board. So with that, if we can close those budget hearings on those first three budgets and move on to the Juvenile Justice Services at 1383. Oh, you know what? Never mind. I'm going back. Sorry. Reopening those previous budgets. Sorry, we have some additional questions that don't apply to all of the agencies. So if we can start on with Assemblymember Howdiggy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question, and no real significant concerns, just for my curiosity, but I just kind of want to know why you guys think there's going to be an increase in caseloads. I was looking at the notes we were provided, and it looks like there was right under 6,000 cases in 2024, but we're expecting that to shoot up to over 6,600 for 2027. So I was just wondering if you could explain what you think that increase in caseload is going to be caused by.
Madam Chair, can we get clarification on what caseload? Is it statewide, individual county?
Sorry, I guess I should have made that clear. I'm asking, I might be ahead of myself.
No, it's the Clark County
Okay, perfect.
adoption
Yeah.
caseloads.
The adoption subsidy caseloads.
Kyra Morgan for the record. I think I can answer this on behalf of the Office of Analytics, but I think we also have the Chief Biostatistician here if we have more questions. Generally, the caseload projections are based on historical actuals, so they have a model that looks at what has occurred over time, and based on that trend, it projects forward what they anticipate to occur. So the increase in caseload from the last actual of the packet I'm looking at here from September of 24 was about 5,900, and that had been increasing pretty consistently for the previous period before that. So I think we're just projecting that increase based on what we've observed in previous historical trends.
So it looks like historically there is about like a 3% or a little bit more than a 3% increase year over year. But do you guys track what's causing that increase? It's interesting to me that it never flattens out, that we're continuously increasing 3% every year.
Kyra Morgan for the record. I think there is a little bit of seasonality in here, but it just gets lost because the volume's so high. So I don't have a concrete answer for you. I could follow up, but generally speaking, I think it is, again, just population growth. Tying it back to the conversation on opioids, we see increased substance abuse. That's obviously a factor in all of this. But I don't have a concrete reason for why we would see the increase other than that's what we're observing in the need.
And I'm assuming the same increase in adoption caseload subsidies in the rural areas. I see there's also an increase there. Is that similar? And the caseload adjustments in that M200, 201, 202, 204, and 206 from the rural child welfare budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. Councilman Navarro for the record. Yes, the adoption subsidy was increased in relation to the foster care subsidy that was approved. The increase was approved last session. So it's in line with the foster care rate increase.
Thank you. And I think Majority Leader Canizaro has some questions as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And mine, I want to talk a little bit about the rural child welfare pieces of this, and in particular, implementation of the Federal Family First Prevention Services Act plan, and some of the pieces of that. There was an indication in the budget request that you would need 7 new transportation technician positions. Can you discuss with us if those transportation technician positions are required in order to comply with the Federal Family First Prevention Services Act?
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Betsy Crumrine, BETSEY-CRUMRINE, Deputy Administrator for DCFS, and directly over the Rural Child Welfare Program. The Families First Prevention Services Act, which I'll refer to as FFPSA moving forward, if that's okay, is an opportunity from the federal government to actually shift the reimbursement, which previously had been put in place when children were removed from their homes, to the prevention side. And so while it's an opportunity for us to move the needle in a big way for child welfare, and so part of our request is to ask for positions for that program, and the driver technicians are not a requirement of that program, but pretty necessary when you're looking at the layout of rural Nevada and the distance between services and where people reside. Currently, I think we provided some data. We had something like 287,000 miles of windshield time last year, and we have caseworkers providing a lot of that transportation at a grade roughly 35. And if we can acquire some positions that are a lower grade to do that transporting, then we can use our caseworkers to do the more meaningful work of working with families.
So it sounds to me like it's not necessarily required to comply with the FFPSA, but more so a decision on how to allocate those resources to allow caseworkers to work on things, but not necessarily something that's required as part of that federal program.
Correct.
So how is it determined that implementation of the FFPSA would be an allowable and appropriate use of opioid settlement funds? And I know we talked a little bit about this with respect to some of the other budgets this morning, but how does this play into that decision to use those opioid settlement funds?
Well, you heard the data, right, about the removal rate in the rural region. 80% of removals have a risk factor of substance misuse or addiction as it directly relates to the removal, the abuse or neglect of the child and the removal of the child. So, that's a fact, right? So we have this opportunity. The federal government has finally, a few years ago, when they adopted the Families First Prevention Services Act, is giving us the opportunity to shift the funding from the back end to the front end. And we have an opportunity to actually intervene with families before kids have been abused or neglected. The 2 evidence-based programs that we have chosen to implement with those families are motivational interviewing, which has been well researched and is directly tied to increasing caregivers' motivation to make difficult behavioral changes, particularly in the areas of substance misuse or with people who have an active addiction affecting their ability to keep their kids safe. In addition to motivational interviewing, the other program that the rural region has chosen is called Family Checkup. There's 25 years worth of research with regards to that program that shows that the program, the goals around improving the range of emotional, behavioral, and academic outcomes for children. It improves parent depression, parental involvement. Some of the results that they've seen with regards to this program, the impact in children are fewer behavioral and emotional problems at home, increased school readiness, more accepting and less rejecting of peers. The impact in adolescence is lower rates of drug use, less antisocial behavior, less bullying, higher rates of school attendance, and better grades. The long-term impact in early adulthood is 30% less marijuana use, 54% less tobacco use, 25% less alcohol use, and 38% less likely to be arrested in early childhood, in early adulthood. So in order to qualify as Families First, you have to use an evidence-based program. We've chosen two, and we've asked for the positions, the drivers and the caseworkers to be able to shift the focus from with a few families, from kids who have been abused and neglected and are in our system that we are reacting to try and implement this federal program, which would allow us to be proactive and prevent kids from coming into the system before they're abused, which is a world I would like to live in.
So I think, sort of building on that, how does the governor's recommendation here to implement this plan align with the goals of the opioid needs assessment and the statewide plan? Because I'm sort of hearing maybe part of that. The other part, I'm not so sure. That first program that you discussed maybe falls in that. But could you talk a little bit about that? How it aligns with the statewide plan and the goals?
Kyra Morgan, for the record. 3 targets that I identified from the statewide plan: building capacity, preventing the misuse of opioids, and reducing harm related to opioids. I think are all very relevant with these interventions and programs.
This may be more of a comment than a question, but if you have anything to add, I think certainly we all recognize and talked a little bit about, I think in response to one of the speaker's questions with respect to how children are being removed from homes and some of the primary reasons for that relating to substance abuse. Part of what you articulated, I think, relates to that. The other part of this program and this FFPSA plan, I'm struggling a little bit with how we are getting that nexus to those opioid settlement funds and how this fits with the statewide plan, which again might be more of a comment than a question. If there's anything you want to add, certainly. But I think there's just some concerns there with trying to get a little bit more clarity on how that all fits together.
Thank you. I guess an overall picture is, so there are a lot of funds that are here, and I know that Senator Titus often asks this question, and so I'm going to channel my inner Robin here and ask this question as well. As far as, and it kind of is in line with what the majority leader had said and what the speaker had said about the use of opioid funds. If we felt like these opioid funds needed to be used in a more, I guess, strategic way to address opioid issues, how would this have fallen into the governor's budget rules and limitations that were placed on you? How would we fund these otherwise?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, this is an enhancement unit, and we would have proposed just 100% state general fund. But I to tell you, early on, we identified that due to the substance use disorders of this population, that it was appropriate to fund it this way.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I don't see any other questions here. And so with that, we will now actually close those first three budgets and move on to 1383 on the Juvenile Justice Services. Go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilman Canavaro for the record. Moving on to budget account 1383, which is our Juvenile Justice Services budget account. The Juvenile Justice Programs Office ensures federal compliance and provides, oversees, and monitors federal and state grant funds to local governmental entities and private nonprofit organizations. This includes providing technical assistance to grantees and conducting quality assurance reviews of grant programs. The following slides outline the decision units within the governor's recommended budget. Decision Unit E900, this request transfers 12 mental health counselor positions from the Juvenile Justice Services budget account 1383 to the Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget account 3646.
Perfect. I think we have one question or a couple questions from Assemblymember Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Chair. If the justification for transferring these 12 positions back to the Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Service budget account is to provide access to funding for overtime, travel, training, that type of thing, why was increasing authority for these expenses in the Juvenile Justice Service budget account not recommended instead? And if you did cover that in the overview, please forgive me, I did not hear it.
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. I think one of the challenges that we face in managing any state agency is once you align with a certain budget account, you have supervision that also aligns with that budget account. And so transferring this way gets it back into the supervision along the lines of our children's mental health and oversight on a clinical level as opposed to where it was before. But in addition to, the other issues that we became aware of when this transfer was made last session.
Follow-up? Thank you so much. So if these positions are approved, would you lose the flexibility to assign the positions to the juvenile justice facility that has the most need currently?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, I do my best to direct our staff to be flexible with the resources that we have, right? But I can just tell you, it's just difficult. It's just difficult to do that without, appropriate alignment in an organization chart. These are just challenges we face in the reality of state agencies.
Okay. One final question. Thank you. So would there be an increase to the training, travel, or overtime in Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget account for the 25-27 biennium? Would that be needed if this recommended transfer of the 12 positions is approved?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, I don't believe there will be at this time.
Thank you.
And are all those 12 positions currently filled?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, I believe they are, but we'll have to confirm.
Okay, I don't see any other questions on this budget, so we will close this one and move to 3147, Youth Alternative Placement. And go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilman Canavaro for the record. Budget account 3147, Youth Alternative Placement. The This account was established to provide financial support to each regional facility for the detention of children who have been adjudicated as delinquent by the Nevada courts. There are 3 regional facilities. 2 of the camps are in Douglas County, which is China Spring Youth Camp and Aurora Pines Youth Camp, and 1 is in Clark County Spring Mountain Youth Camp. Decision Unit E301. This request replaces the American Rescue Act funds for the China Spring Youth Camp with general fund appropriations. And Decision Unit E499. This request sunsets the American Rescue Act grant funds for the China Spring Youth Camp.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We will go first to a question we have from Senator Don Darrow Loop.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And reading the information and hearing the short presentation, there are 17 youth at China Spring and 2 at Aurora Pines. And so will you discuss the amount of funding that they would need, those 2 camps would need to maintain operations at their current census levels?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. As you know, we don't manage the camps, but if you don't mind, Jessica Stocking, who is the director of China Springs, is available here to answer questions.
That'd be great if she could come up to the table. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Jessica Stocking for the record, Jessicka Stocking. Can you go ahead and repeat your question?
Yes. So the staffing levels at China Spring was 17, and Aurora Pines was 2, which I don't even know how you, interact with, like, 2. But would you please discuss the amount of funding that it's going to take to maintain operations at those current census levels?
So, thank you for the question. So currently camp is at 17 male. Well, we're at 19 males now and 2 females. And so the camp's capacity is actually 40 males and 16 females. And so to run at that capacity which is what we would like to do. We're asking for the state to increase our funding for $1.2 million and an additional $798,000 from the counties. What's important to discuss here too is that camp has historically not seen a budget increase since 2013. And so what happens is that makes it very difficult to in a sense, run the camp at its capacity and staff. We are a PREA, we fall under PREA, so we do have a ratio we have to maintain, which is waking hours is 1 to 10 and sleeping hours is 1 to 16. So our current budget that's in the general fund in the governor's budget will not sustain camp, even at its current capacity, given the funding increases and the rate increases for our staff and things like that.
Just to follow up, Madam Chair, is there any discussion when you only have 2 at one camp to consolidate or to, I hate to use that word, but to put all the youth in one area as opposed to having those 2 juveniles in their own facility?
Thank you for that question. So currently our youth are in one unit. So China Spring, the way it's set up is we have a male unit and then we do have a female unit. And right now I've moved the females up to the male unit. Now they're completely separated and don't see each other. Yes, absolutely. There becomes a question when you do only have 2 youth. And that's where I really depend on my chiefs and the advisory board that reports to China Spring just to see what their need in their communities are, because there are very few female placements as well. And so the need is there. It's just making sure that we get the appropriate female in those beds. So they are in one building currently. So yes, my goal is to increase my male beds and move my females back to Aurora Pines, which is a different building.
Okay, thank you. It just sounds a little bit like solitary confinement and not having the interaction of, they're being educated, they're going to school, they're doing some things during the day. And if there's only 2 of them, that's different interaction than if there's more than 2. And I get that if there's more than that, like way more than that, it can present a problem. But some interaction, right, to rehabilitate is necessary?
Absolutely. So while they're at China Spring and Aurora Pines, I'm really excited about the programs that we do offer because at the end of the day, they're still kids, and whether they're in a correctional placement, it really shouldn't matter. So our kids have access to a licensed clinical social worker who meets with them to really look at the mental health aspect because very rarely does a kid wake up and say, I'm going to be a menace to society. A lot of things play into that, and a lot of trauma has been in those kids' lives before they got to camp. We also have alcohol and drug counselors that see the kids for substance use issues and can work through those issues with the kids at camp. And one thing I'm very excited about is we have a parent support group. So just like the kiddos, parents want their kids to be successful, whether they're in camp or in the community. So what we've done is created a parent support group. So prior to them getting their kids from camp, they attend this group together to talk about the challenges they have, the fears that they have with their kids coming back into the community. And so, yes, they do receive a lot of service while they're with us at China Spring and Aurora Pines.
Thank you very much.
Senator Titus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here and appreciate the conversations we've had. I drive by that every day, going twice a day, actually, back and forth. And I appreciate all the updates you have done with that camp. Just to be clear, these youth are sent there via court order for the most part. Is that correct?
Jessica Stocking, for the record, yes, that is correct. So we serve 16 counties in the state of Nevada. So and they are all court ordered to be with us.
If you had more personnel, could you receive more female youth? Or is that what the census is at this current time?
Jessica Stocking, for the record, we can serve up to 10 female youth currently. So it's just the need in the communities right now. I will tell you it ebbs and flows. So we just had 5 girls not too long ago. We did graduate some from the program. So it's just based on the need in the community. Sometimes summer months are a little bit busier for us. But yes, if we were able to increase our funding and our ask for the state that's in special consideration, we would be able to serve 40 males and 16 girls, which is important because there is a wait list to get into our program, and kids sit in detention until they can get into China Spring.
So if I might, Madam Chair, thank you. So there's members of this committee, myself included, and several others have worked hard over many sessions to make sure that the program is funded. Looking at our notes right now, however, it looks like I know there's been negotiation between the counties and the state, and I thought that the counties have kind of stepped up a little bit and paid a little bit more, but reading the notes, I don't see that that's actually accurate. Could you tell me what percent and how that has changed with counties' investment versus the state's ask?
Jessica Stocking, for the record, thank you. So currently we are at a 56-44 split, 56% coming from the counties, 44% coming from the state. Historically, it's been a 50-50 split, and that's what we're hoping to get back to. So 50% of a contribution from the state and 50% from the counties.
But currently, thank you for that, but currently you need this adjustment just to stay whole?
Yes. So we need that additional adjustment from the state, and then we're asking the counties for an increased contribution to make us whole so that we can continue, like, for instance, in the next biennium, it won't be a significant ask. We can stay steady as we go biennium to biennium.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for the improvements, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the questions.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblymember Brown-May.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. Thank you very much for the presentation, and your passion is very apparent that you really care significantly about what you're doing. So thank you for your service and your support. My question, following up on my distinguished colleague, is really relative to that, the portion that the counties are playing, right, and the effects on their budgets as they're also trying to plan. So I think I have 2 questions. So first, can you talk about discussions that you all have had perhaps with the counties to determine if additional funding can be provided by the counties? I understand that they're also stressed.
Jessica Stocking for the record. Yes, everyone is stressed, it feels like, this session. So we have had a lot of conversation. I will tell you, since my time as a director, it's about coming on about a year, really tried to improve my relationships with the chiefs and really keep them apprised of information in camp. At the end of the day, they're sending the kids to our camp, so they need to be aware of what our need and our ask is. And so we've really laid a lot of groundwork with our chiefs to talk about the additional funding that would be requested of each of the counties based on their usage of the facility. There's a formula that we use. They are very aware that they have kids sitting in detention waiting for placement, and so the need is definitely there. So I know that there's stress on the county level, but they've been fully communicated with in regards to the ask and what would be expected if this budget was approved.
Thank you. I understand, and Chair, I don't know if this is appropriate or not. We've had an opportunity to talk to a couple of the counties. I don't know if anyone is here from Douglas County. I understand that they specifically had concerns relative to this.
I believe we do. Thank you, and I appreciate Douglas County sending someone here so we could further discuss this. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Wendy Lang. I'm the Assistant County Manager of Douglas County, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. So as we look at this, we're talking about the portion that the counties are expected to pay and how we're looking at a flat budget. And I understand that your county in particular, Douglas County, has had concerns with regard to increasing expenses associated with this. So can you talk about perhaps the conversations that you've had relative to what your concerns are? How are you funding your portion as we continue to look at a flat budget? And what are the concerns coming out of Douglas County?
Thank you very much for the question through you, Madam Chair. Wendy Lang for the record. So as Ms. Stocking indicated, the increase being sought that's in this decision unit is shared across, and I think Douglas County finds it to be, much like the other counties, something that would be reasonable and sustainable to each individual county. So the allocations would not hit any individual entity, would not specifically fall upon the state's shoulders, nor would it fall upon individual counties, including Douglas County. While China Spring is located in and managed by Douglas County personnel, we would very much love to see its success and fund it. That's not feasible for Douglas County, but our proportionate share based on the formula and statute with regard to how we can fund it is something that's reasonable within our budgetary means.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. And Madam Chair, one question. Thank you so much. So really, I think this is for Administrator Williams. I'm just curious to know. A couple of my colleagues have brought this up already this morning. Is there a time, and really from my own understanding, is there a time where, and maybe it's not for you, maybe it's for Governor's Finance Office, is there a time when state divisions present actual needs coming from your departments or your divisions in cooperation with the entities that we're working cooperatively with, like the counties, the municipalities? Is there a time when you get to bring forward to GFO what the actual needs are for Governor's Finance Office consideration for final budget compilation? And I guess the reason I'm asking, definitely the reason I'm asking the question is because it feels like we only see what comes from GFO without understanding what the real needs are coming from each of the divisions or the municipalities as we build our budget out. So can you or perhaps GFO speak to that? Is there a time we're presenting actual needs for consideration at that level?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, our opportunity is in the enhancement units that we propose.
I guess this is, I'm going to ask the question of Douglas County while you're at the table, as well as perhaps a representative from China Springs. Did you have these conversations with the division in what your needs were prior to the budget coming out?
Jessica Stocking for the record, yes. So about a year ago, we developed our budget and asked for an increase.
Okay, so the GFO was definitely aware that like Douglas County would struggle to come up with these additional costs, and that in order to even maintain the children that are in your facility that you would need an increase?
Jessica Stocking, for the record, correct.
Thank you, and thank you. I don't know if we have any other questions on this budget. I'm looking around, I don't see any.
Madam Chair, if I could just
Oh, go
offer
ahead.
one point of clarification, Marla McDade Williams. So that request was included in items for special consideration that you would see in the proposal.
But it ultimately did not make its way into the budget, so it was not
Government, right,
prioritized by
correct.
GFO.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and close that budget, and we'll move on to probably our bigger one here, the Summit View Youth Center, 3148. I will go ahead and ask you guys to come back up to the table. Thank you for musical chairs today, and go ahead and begin when you're ready.
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. Budget account 3148 is really a proposal to develop an intake assessment center at Summit View Youth Center. Currently, Summit View itself is approved for 48 state correctional beds for male youth between the ages of 12 and 20. The physically secure nature of Summit View, in comparison to the other two DCFS juvenile justice facilities, allows DCFS to house youth in a secure environment there. We do have a proposal to use 24 beds on the Summit View campus to operate an intake assessment center, as noted. A portion of the proposal is to use settlement funds from the Fund for Resilient Nevada to fund this project. And if I may, again, I would like to ask Kyra Morgan, a DCFS medical epidemiologist, to give an overview of substance use disorder for youth in the juvenile justice system.
For the record, Kyra Morgan. Similar to my previous presentation, I just want to provide you with some of the information that we take into account when considering to request opioid settlement dollars for the assessment center. This time I'll lead with the NRS. NRS 433.738 does allow for funds to be allocated to statewide projects, including programs for persons involved in the criminal justice or juvenile justice systems. In addition, again, we looked into the research, and again, I want to emphasize that there's a complex and cyclical nature, an interweaving between substance abuse and juvenile justice involvement. I have a couple more studies here with me today. One is from 2022. It's a study that evaluated the impact of household substance use on the juvenile justice population. It found that justice-involved children with parental substance misuse had over twice the odds of developing opioid misuse themselves. It also found that justice-involved children who had both parental and sibling substance misuse, which is not uncommon, had over 3 times the odds of developing opioid misuse themselves. Another reference, in 2023, there was a press release from the U.S. Department of Justice that indicated 84% of youth in juvenile justice facilities self-reported using drugs, and 60% met the diagnostic criteria for a substance use disorder. I also have here a 12-year longitudinal study. It's called the Northwestern Juvenile Project. It looked at youth that were committed to juvenile justice facilities, and it followed them for 12 years post involvement with the juvenile justice system. And that study found that by the median age of 28, 91% of males and 78% of females in the study population had developed a substance use disorder. Further, the National Institute on Drug Abuse emphasizes that juvenile justice systems play a major role in connecting adolescents to treatment. A lot of times these youth who are justice involved, this is their opportunity to have an intervention that can stop them from going down that path. So here, again, my strong argument is that treatment, which really starts with an appropriate assessment and placement for these youth, becomes primary prevention when you consider the cyclical nature and the interplay between substance misuse and juvenile justice involvement. Again, similarly to my discussion in child welfare, it's my interpretation that the opioid settlement funds clearly align with target areas 1 through 3, building capacity, preventing the misuse of opioids, and reducing harm related to opioids. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we'll start with Assemblymember Howdegate.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do have a couple of questions, if that's okay. Okay, I have a couple of questions on the new intake assessment center. And so I was reading through the material we provided, and I know that the intake assessment center is mainly for the youth to avoid that long delay while they're in county detention facilities and then expecting their DCFS assessment. And so this would allow them to be a part of the state, go through an assessment, some programming, it sounds like, while they're waiting their DCFS assessment. Is there going to be any overlap in the assessments? Because it sounds like now you're going to be doing an assessment while they wait for their DCFS assessment.
Good morning, Sharon Anderson. For the record, I serve as the I serve as the Deputy Administrator for Juvenile Justice Services. Your question is regarding assessments. There is no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, it's regarding the new intake assessment center. I know that there's funding being requested to develop this new intake assessment center and build the 4 new buildings. And so it sounds like from the material that we received that there's a need for this because right now it's taking the children 50 days approximately to get their DCFS assessment. And so we want to remove them from the custody of the county and put them immediately in custody of the state and do an assessment and then provide programming so that they get some credit before they receive their DCFS assessment. And so I just want to make sure that there's no duplication of efforts.
Thank you for your question, Assembly Member. So the assessment center, the assessment doesn't start at 50 days. The assessments actually occur shortly after the division is notified of the youth's commitment. Currently, that's how that occurs. But this proposal is really just changing the location of where the assessments are being completed, which would be while they are actually in state custody. Currently, the way that the system operates is that when youth are committed, they are committed from the local county divisions.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you make sure you identify yourself before you speak?
Okay. My apologies. Sharon Anderson, for the record. So those youth who are committed to the state are currently housed in the local detention facilities, and they go through their assessments while they are in the detention facility to determine what the most appropriate placement is. The issue is that the way that the state of Nevada works is that Nevada is a non-determinate sentencing state, which means that youth are not earning. It's not their time in custody is not it's not time based, but it's program based. And so the youth who are in the detention facilities are not receiving programming. So they're not receiving any credit for the time that they are in the facilities. The Intake and Assessment Center would expedite and provide a streamline of a transition from the youth being in the county custody into state custody, where those same services that they currently receive while they are in their local detention facilities would now be provided at the center.
May I follow up? Okay, perfect. That clarifies it for me. So the way I read it, it was that while they were in the county detention facilities, they weren't getting the assessment done. So they are getting the assessment done, and this intake assessment center just moves them into state custody sooner so that they can receive the state programming and get credit.
Sharon Anderson, for the record, correct.
Okay, perfect. And can I continue follow up, Madam Chair? Okay, now the material that we received showed that the intake assessment center would be opened even before the 4 buildings were built in an existing building, correct? And then once the 4 buildings are built, you're going to move the assessment center into one of those 4 buildings, and the other 3 will be for programming. Will there be an increase in beds before the 4 buildings are built using that vacant existing building?
Thank you for the question, Assembly Member Sharon Anderson, for the record. There is currently a standing building that is available for housing for the youth. The additional improvement projects are for the services that will be provided to those youth. And so the buildings are for education services, the screening and assessment services, and also programming.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure I fully understand. Okay, so the new buildings, the 4 new buildings that will be completely constructed, brand new, won't have any beds. That's just all programming, correct? Okay, perfect. So then the new beds that will be created will be in the existing building. And so how many beds will be created before, or how many new beds will you add before the new 4 buildings are built?
Thank you for the question. Sharon Anderson for the record. Currently, we are looking to have a capacity of 24 youth at the facility.
Okay, perfect. And so all 24 beds will be available before the 4 new buildings are built?
Correct. Sharon Anderson for the record.
Okay, perfect. And then just one last question, Madam Chair. Okay. Maybe 1.5. Okay. Now, I was looking at the budget request, and I know you guys are looking to fill positions prior to the completion, prior to even the start of this, of the CIP program, the building of the 4 new buildings. I know 30 positions by October 1st of 2025, and then it looks like the remaining 38 positions at the beginning of 2026. So can you kind of walk me through how that timeline, the CIP timeline, and the need for the positions before, like the 30 positions before we even start construction of the 4 new buildings? Is that because you expect those 24 beds to be filled right away? Or kind of walk me through, because you're looking for the staffing before even the construction begins on those 4 new buildings. So kind of walk me through the request and then the CIP that goes along with it.
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember Sharon Anderson for the record. So we are looking to incrementally increase the admission of the youth as we hire staff to be able to supervise them based on the Prison Rape Elimination Act ratios, which is 8 youth to 1 staff, with the corresponding support services personnel. And so the intent would be to move to staff for the initial 8 youth, and then just continue to grow as the CIP projects are being constructed simultaneously. Again, the CIP projects are not associated with the beds. It's really the space for the programming to be maximized.
Okay, and okay, but it looks like you're asking for 30 positions on October 1st, 2025, but you're only going to fill 8 beds, starting with, you said starting with 8 youth?
Sharon Anderson for the record. We are looking to staff up as much as possible. At minimum, we would be we were doing it in increments of 8 to ensure PREA ratios are maintained, right? So when I say 8, it doesn't have to be just 8. If we're able to staff it immediately with all the staff, then we would, maximize that space immediately.
And I promise just one last question, okay?
Ask as many as you need to.
This is the last one, Madam Chair. Okay, so you currently have 48 beds, and I think only 42 beds are being used. So this increase of 24 beds, do you expect all the beds to be filled? And then do you expect to have any trouble filling these 30 positions? I mean, we've heard that it's difficult to hire, positions stay vacant. So talk to me a little bit about, do you expect to fill the beds, and do you expect to fill the positions? And that's my last question, Madam Chair, I promise.
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember Sharon Anderson for the record. So we have a couple things going on here. You have the Summit View Youth Center is currently in existence. It is physically a 96-bed capacity facility. Summit View Youth Center is currently budgeted at 48 beds. Those 48 beds are one of the units on the campus. There's another unit that is a 48-bed capacity unit, which is the unit that we are speaking of in relation to the Intake and Assessment Center. So the Intake and Assessment Center will not affect the actual Summit View Youth Center program. They will be operated on the same property, but as 2 separate programs. So that was the first question. I don't recall the next one, if you don't mind repeating. Thank you.
The next one was just about staffing. You're asking for 30 positions October 2025, and then 38 positions January, just 6 months later, like January, well, actually less than 6 months later, 4 months later, the beginning of 2026. Do you have any indication whether you'll be able to staff up at 100%, or will you, do these positions fill up pretty quickly?
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember Sharon Anderson for the record. Our team will be aggressively seeking to recruit for those positions, utilizing the state job fairs, and as well as the online recruiting. We have been very successful at decreasing the vacancies throughout our residential programs. And so we're confident that we will be able to staff these at a reasonable rate.
No. Do you have any other questions? It's okay. I'm going to go to our Speaker Yeager. I think he has some questions as well.
Thank you, Chair. I had a few questions, but my colleague, I think, maybe asked a few of them. But, I'm going to have questions about the opioid funds, and I heard the explanation. I appreciate it. I guess the first question I have right now, it indicates that the Summit Youth Center has 42 youth that are there. Do we know how many of them have substance abuse, like nexus to their background in terms of those 42?
Kyra Morgan for the record. I don't have data on those specific youth, but based on the idea that Nevada's not doing any better than the nation when it comes to substance use, I would be comfortable assuming that 84% of them have been using substances.
Thank you. And then one last question on this, if I could. So it looks like originally this is a $12.1 million ask, and originally it was $6.2 million from the opioid settlement fund, $5.8 million from general funds, and then we received a budget amendment late January, transitioning all of that to the opioid settlement funds rather than kind of the blended model. So my question there was just talk a little bit about why that decision was made, because clearly there was a decision at the beginning that said we think, half of it could be funded by opioids and half of it general fund, but now we have 100%. So just wanted to know a little bit about the thought process of moving to 100% funding for the non-federal portion.
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. I will have to punt this to the governor's finance office.
Tiffany Greenmeyer for the record. When it came to the intake center during agency requests, there was multiple discussions about should it be 100%, should it be 50%. We went kind of round and round. I actually worked at DCFS and was the deputy administrator and built multiple decision units as to different scenarios how we could fund this. And then when agency request, we funded it at 50%. We went into GovRec. Then there was another decision. Could we fund it 100% based on Kyra Morgan's analysis that came out? And it was determined in GovRec that we could fund it at 100%. And so there was a decision unit to move it to 100%, but that never happened. So when I showed up as the director, as you know, after the State of the State, I saw that it wasn't 100%, and I knew that we had made a decision to make it 100%. It was more like an oopsie, and it never made it. So that's why I made the decision to put it at 100% opiate dollars.
Thank you. And Chair, not a question, but I just wonder if maybe 84% would be more appropriate, right? We had an analysis that sort of said, 84% is, I know it's not specific to Summit View, but that's sort of the national average, and Nevada may be at the national average. So not a question that you have to answer, but just maybe a suggestion or consideration for the committee later on down the road. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, if I may respond, Kyra Morgan for the record. I think the 84% is one half of the pie, right? Because that half is the half where we can assume that our juvenile justice population is using substances. But there's this other half of the coin where, again, we know that by being in the juvenile justice system and having those adverse childhood experiences, when we follow those folks over time, I can quantify as high as 91% who will then later develop a substance use diagnosis after their stay with juvenile justice. So I just wanted to put that on the record as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. I would also just point out that most of this agencies and these funding sources existed before we received these opioid settlement funds. And I do have serious concerns, and I think most of the committee members do, that we are funding existing programs that we will likely need far beyond the exhaustion of these settlement funds. These are a limited fund. These aren't like an ongoing source of revenue for our state. So I would just hope that we would also be mindful that we're filling funding gaps with temporary money. So more of a comment than a question. But with that, I don't see any other questions. If we could close this budget and move to our last one, which is 3263, Youth Parole Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilman Canavar, for the record. Youth budget account 3263 is Youth Parole Services. Youth Parole Services provides supervision and case management service to delinquent youth committed to the division by county juvenile district courts for placement at a correctional institution or other placement. Youth Parole Services also supervise youth on parole from other states through the Interstate Compact on Juveniles. Decision Unit E 250 requests additional funding for service agreements to assist youth in various locations. And Decision Unit 502 aligns revenue associated with the transfer of one psychiatric caseworker position from the Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget account 3646 within Decision Unit E 902 in that budget. And then Decision Unit E 902 is request for the transfer from the psychiatric caseworker position from the Northern Nevada Child and Adolescent Services budget account 3281 to the Youth Parole Services budget account 3263.
Thank you. And I think I don't see any other questions from the committee here, but I do have a couple of questions. I have some concerns. We have a process, as you are very well aware of, that you have to seek legislative authority through IFC during the interim to make these kind of transfers. And I just have some concerns because it looks like there was a shortfall in fiscal year 24 and that there were ARPA funds that were used during that time by the division that were allocated to the Children, Youth, and Family Administration budget to cover those increased contract costs for the behavioral support of youth on parole. But rather than seeking the legislatively required interim finance committee to reallocate those funds to that youth parole services budget, it looks like you just did it on your own, and we just happened to find out about it when this budget was presented. So I was wondering if you could explain where that decision came from, how that decision was made not to go through the work session process that everyone else is required to do so. Just have some concerns about like going around the legislative process.
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. I don't think there was an intent to bypass the legislative process. I think it was we do this when we identify that we have needs that can be covered within budgets that we have, and it's appropriate use of that funding. Sometimes it's just a thought process. Hey, I need new funding, and I'm going to go do this. And then somebody's like, no, but why would you do that when we have this option available to us? So I think that is what happened in this situation. We did actually build a work program, and I think through the discussion realized that ARPA funding was appropriate in this crisis billing for behavioral health services to cover those costs, and that it, we did our homework and were advised that it was an appropriate use of the funding, and so that's the decision that we made to then withdraw the work program and pay for it under that other budget account.
So am I understanding this? You actually knew you had to submit a work program for this, and then did the GFO say you didn't have to? Like, where did the ultimate who made the ultimate decision that you didn't need to go through IFC and that you could do this like unlawfully?
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. So as you know, we have a Governor's Finance Office analyst that we work with on all of the work programs that we prepare. And it's always a conversation about what is required to move forward and what isn't. And ultimately, we take the direction of the Governor's Finance Office, and we did with respect to this item.
So in this case, you initially submitted a work session, our work program, sorry, not work session, I'm getting all my terminology mixed up, a work program to bring this to IFC, and at the direction and advice of GFO, they told you you did not need to go to IFC and they would just transfer these funds.
For the record, Marla McDade Williams. So I don't believe transfer the funds is the correct terminology. I think it was recognition that the services that we had already been budgeted for were appropriate for these youth to be to have their services paid for under.
Okay. So maybe not transfer the funds, but you were given advice that you didn't need to go to IFC to reallocate those funds to the youth parole services.
For the record, Marla McDade Williams, our work program was to go to the IFC contingency fund for additional funding. And so then there was recognition that the additional funding wasn't needed because we had the Children's Behavioral Health budget account that was appropriate to provide for those services.
Okay, thank you. And I may call up the GFO as well to see whether or not, if you could come to the table. Thank you. I guess my question for you then would be, does your office, are they advising do we need to start looking for this in other agency reallocations of ARPA funds? Did your office not believe that a reallocation of ARPA funds needed to go to IFC during the interim? And is that why they were advised, this agency or division was advised to make that reallocation?
Tiffany Greenmeyer for the record. I'm not sure what's going on with this situation. I'll have to investigate what happened. But no, we come to IFC if we're reallocating any money. A work program is done for all ARPA dollars that need to be reallocated. So I'm not positive. I'll have to research what happened.
I'm hoping you can look into that. It honestly gave me a little bit of heart palpitations that there were potentially that this was the official advice coming from the GFO was if you're making these kind of reallocations, you can do that. So I think our committee would appreciate to see what went wrong here in this particular situation, and I appreciate that. Yes, go ahead. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, just for an opportunity to ask a question. Not so much about the reallocation of funds, but we've heard all day long and on many committees now questions to the GFO and the executive branch on these meetings regarding the proper use of opioid funds and the concern expressed by our chair that they will, that's possibly a slippery slope and they're going to run out. Can you clarify for me how long the opioid funds will be available?
Yeah, it's my understanding from the DHHS Director's Office that the opiate fundings will be around for 20 years.
All right. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
No problem. Do we have any other further questions? Oh, yep. Go ahead, Speaker Yeager.
Thank you, Chair. And just a follow-up to Senator Titus's question, do we know over the course of the 20 years, do we have a set amount of what Nevada's portion is going to be per year of those opioid settlement amounts?
Tiffany Greenmeyer for the record. I don't have that in front of me, but I'm sure we can get that information from the Director's Office.
Just for the committee's information and the public, there is a dashboard that is available online. It tells what the approximate distributions are every single year. It is not a consistent amount. It is a different amount depending on how the settlement structure was allocated to our state. You can see all those monies coming in, and it's a pretty good website. But you will see that in some years it is a larger amount, in some years it is a smaller amount, depending on how that was ultimately determined. So. Any other further questions? Doesn't seem like there are any. With that, we will close our final budget.
Madam
Thank you.
Chair,
Oh, go
just
ahead.
want to thank you for this opportunity this morning and really extend our appreciation to your LCB fiscal analyst who has been very patient as we've worked through a lot of questions. And, it's been a really good process for us, and I just want to extend my appreciation for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure you guys will all continue to work together as we try to clean up some of these inconsistencies and some of these things that we have some additional questions to after we leave this hearing. So thank you for that. And with that, we will close this final budget hearing, and we will move on to the last agenda item, which is public comment. If there are people in the room to provide public comment, if you could come up to the table. And while you are coming up to the table, I will remind the public that if you would like to call in, the number is 1-888-475-4499. The meeting ID is 848-5142-3043. I would remind you, if you are making public comment, to please state your name clearly for the record, and we can all see if we can spell along with some of our people at the table now, but go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Chair, members of the committee, they said I had to go first, so I'll go first. Jonathan Norman, Norman, Nevada Coalition of Legal Service Providers. First, I want to, excuse me. First, I want to thank the DHHS, DCFS, and Clark and Washoe County DFS. They're really the safety net for a lot of our families and kids around the state, and we appreciate their work every day. In thinking about the questions around the needs of our foster care kids around the state, I think those were, great questions about where that funding comes from and how much it should be. On the opioid question, I think of a couple of things. It's not just the kids that are using substances, but their parents. And oftentimes we'll get the reports and maybe the parent ends up at methamphetamines, but we don't necessarily know where that substance abuse started, and we know often it starts with opioids. I've had kids on my caseload who have, when they hit 16, I had one young man who started using methamphetamines. He was on the run from child welfare for a year when he was had got a juvenile justice charge. And when I asked him, and he was unrecognizable at that time. And fortunately, through Clark County DFS and JJ, he was able to get sober and now is in the extended adult program, the Step Up, and is doing really well. But when I asked him why, he said, I wanted to see what was so good that my parents gave me up for this. And so I think the nexus between substance abuse and foster kids, whether it's at the front end, the ACE they get from their parents using and them being brought into care, or how they grapple with becoming adults from that trauma, that it's on both ends. So thank you for your consideration. I would love for that money to augment and build more services for kids. So thank you.
Chair Nguyen, members of the committee, Cadence Matievich for the record, CADENCEMATIJEVICH, representing Washoe County. I want to thank you for the conversation that we've had today. I feel like there's almost that this has been a watershed day for us. Because I think through this process, we've identified, through the discussion, we've identified that we have a process problem. And I, as someone who previously developed budgets as a state division administrator, I understand the challenges of the budget rules. And so, we appreciate the position that Administrator Williams is in. And we don't think that she's gatekeeping our programs, but we also don't think that the process allows a way for the counties to engage early enough in the process to help the governor's finance office truly understand what our needs are. And so we would welcome the opportunity to have a conversation about how the counties can engage earlier in the process and be more directly involved in the process. So that's high level. I do feel like I need to put some specific data on the record as well, though, for Washoe County. We talked a lot about Decision Unit E251 and Budget Account 3141, and I feel compelled to tell you that even what's been included in the governor's recommended budget for us is still short $600,000 in fiscal 26 and $445,000 in fiscal year 27 for us to meet the mandate. So we are going to need to continue to have conversations around that. And then for our child welfare agency, last year we removed 331 kids from their home. Of those, 105 had their primary code was substance use. Of those 105, 94 were methamphetamine. So I hope that helps answer some of the questions that you had earlier. We appreciate the dialogue and look forward to continuing. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Joanna Jacob, JACOB, no S, please, on behalf of Government Clark County. I'll concur with the statements of my colleague from Washoe, and additionally, a few concerns from Clark County. First, wanted to say we are in support. We just had a dialogue about the Summit View Assessment Center. This is something that the state has worked with Clark County and our Juvenile Justice Division on, and we are in support of the investment in that service. We have a significant need based on kids who have been ordered by the court to the custody of DCFS, and they are sitting in our detention center awaiting services, and that is something that is of concern, but would like to thank DCFS for their investment in the budget for that. We have a concern also on the opioid funding, a very detailed dialogue about that today. And I think that based on what we heard today, and I would want some clarification on this, is that those are one-time funds that are being put into our budget. Based on the testimony we heard from how the budget process works, I'll concur with my colleague's statements about really, we have to think about that process, because if that's one-time funds that will not be then also something that we can depend upon when we're calculating the base for next year, that is a concern to us. We, in response to Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, for Clark County, with the bulk of the kids in care today, over 3,100 kids for us, this is a significant concern on how we deal with legislative mandates, respectfully, and whether they should be added into the block grant, or are they going to be treated outside of the block grant? This is something that we have struggled with since the inception of the block grant. Since 2012, we have added over 100 positions to try and deal with the mandates, and also federal policy change that happened that I don't think anybody really thought about when we were putting this structure in place in 2009 and 2011. We couldn't have thought about the Families First Act, and it's been put pressures on both the state and the counties. I would say that this is one of the issues. There's currently a bill in this session about caseload ratios proposed by Senator Scheibel. We submitted funding request in our agency, in the data that we sent to DCFS, to bring the county into alignment with a safety model that was adopted by the state that would have brought us into alignment with that caseload ratio. As it stands today, that bill is a unfunded mandate on us, and we have been exempted in the terms of that bill from the law that says if there's additional services or programs put onto counties, that there should be resources allocated. We are specifically exempted in that bill from that, and that is a concern to me. I really welcome the ability to partner with both DCFS, DHHS, and this committee to talk about how we may be able to address some of these structural challenges. This is not a criticism of Administrator McDade Williams. You heard the challenges that she faces in trying to put together the budget under our current structure. So thank you for your time and attention to this issue. It is of paramount concern to Clark County, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Allie Bannister, ALIBANISTER. I'm the Chief of Juvenile Services here in Carson City. Carson City Juvenile Services would ask the state to consider contributing additional money to the China Spring and Aurora Pines Youth Camp. China Spring Youth Camp is a critical program that serves adjudicated probation youth across Nevada. The camp plays an essential role in the rehabilitation of these young individuals, offering a structured environment that intervenes before youth are committed to state parole. The China Spring Youth Camp acts as a graduated sanction, providing a critical intervention before youth are accelerated into state parole or correctional care. By keeping youth out of the more costly and intensive state system, this program saves significant state resources while offering a more effective rehabilitative alternative. China Spring Youth Camp provides an invaluable service by giving youth a chance to receive correctional care and rehabilitation within a local community-based setting. This approach reduces the needs for more costly state parole commitments, ultimately benefiting both the youth and the state's resources. Unfortunately, the rising costs for counties to manage youth in correctional facilities like China Spring have placed additional financial strain on local jurisdictions. Having the state assist with funding would maintain the program's effectiveness and ensure sustainability. The camp has consistently done an exceptional job of helping at-risk youth. Many have shown significant improvements through this program, and the camp has earned a reputation for its positive outcomes. Its ability to help juveniles make better decisions and reintegrate back into society plays a vital role in reducing recidivism and providing these youth with a second chance. Carson City Juvenile Services would be grateful for additional financial support from the state, as it would save costs long-term by preventing youth from being prematurely funneled into a more expensive state correctional facility. Historically, the state split the costs of the camp with the counties who utilized the program. This was done as a 50-50 split. In doing this, and going back to the 50-50 split, would allow the camp to operate at capacity. We believe that further investment in China Spring Youth Camp will not only alleviate the financial burden on counties, but also continue to offer critical alternatives to more extreme correctional options. This program is an essential tool in rehabilitating Nevada's youth, giving them the support they need to rebuild their lives and stay out of the state parole system. Thank you for your consideration on this matter.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else here coming to the table in Carson City, and I see no one in Las Vegas. If we can go to the phone lines.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to provide public comment today, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. The public lines are open and working, but there are no callers to provide public comment at this time.
Thank you. And with that, we will close public comment. I want to thank everyone who participated today, and including people that were surprise called up to the table. We appreciate your expertise and your experience and sharing them with us today as we are getting ready to work on more substantial work on these budgets. So with that, thank you, and the meeting is adjourned.